Fantastic. Okay. Wonderful. We are good to go. All right. Fantastic. Okay, now we're cooking on the front burner. Julia, thank you so much for being on, for talking with me and being on the Savvy Painter podcast. It is an honor and a privilege to be able to speak with you today. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
So this podcast goes out to mostly visual artists who are painters specifically, and who are very, very well versed in your writing and are big fans of your work. So we have a lot of people who have been very, very excited about this opportunity to connect with you. So I want to first of all say thank you so much for being a part of this and for joining me. So your new book is called The Listening Path, and so much of your book talks about the connection with ourselves and our environment and with our art itself. And I'm wondering from you, what, in terms of your path in writing that book, what was something that was just really touched you in terms of listening to yourself and getting that creation out?
Well, I moved from New York, which is hectic and busy and noisy, to Santa Fe, which was quiet. And when I moved, this relative silence was frightening to me. And I thought, I miss my urban soundscape. But after I was here for a little while, I realized that I was listening differently, more deeply, more concretely, more positively. And I found myself thinking, oh, maybe there is something to be said just about listening. And I went to New York on a visit, and I had lunch with my longtime muse, uh, a man named Joel Fotinos, who's at St. Martin's Press. And Joel said to me, Julia, what are you thinking about? And I said, well, I'm thinking about listening. And he said, oh, I'd love to hear your thoughts on listening. So his curiosity combined with my dis-ease uh, combined together became the catalyst for the book. And I found myself hearing the caws of ravens, hearing the trilling of songbirds, hearing, uh, if you listen very closely, we have lizards, and they skitter across the stones. And so all of these things were part and parcel of the book. And I found myself thinking, oh, I wonder what my friends are thinking. And I began to interview them about listening. And I discovered that many people don't really listen. They they sort of listen, but all the time that they're listening, they're preparing their answer. So they're not really in the moment. So that came a second layer of the book, which was listening to others Don't interrupt. Don't interrupt.
which is very hard to do, I think. I think for a lot of people I know, even I think for me, learning to interview people, to do a podcast like this one, kind of gave me a lot of practice in listening and really being present. And I noticed that as I was doing that, the more that I did that, the more I realized how hard I have to concentrate to really hear what people are saying and to be 100% present while they're talking. And it's actually, when you're really, really listening, maybe because we're not used to it, it's almost exhausting because you're focusing so hard on what the person is saying and not, allowing the rest of the chatter in our heads to come through.
Yes, I think it's very true that when we go to listen to others, it takes great focus. And I think it's true that at first this can be difficult, but it's so rewarding once you realize that the person that you're talking to has interesting things to say, and that if you just let them finish their thoughts, they may have something innovative and exciting. Then it becomes clear that listening is actually, I want to say, a more ready path.
What do you mean by that? A ready path?
Well, that when we train ourselves to be alert, we train ourselves to focus and to pay attention. And once we sort of set the intention of, I'm going to be a good listener in this conversation, that creates a sort of antennae, and it's ready to pick up the most subtle signals.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything about this practice that, since you started it, that has surprised you? I mean, you moved from from New York, all the noise, it's both delightful and overwhelming, like all the busyness and all the people and everything that's happening. Most of it feels, at least for me when I've been there, to be very man-made. And then to go to New Mexico and to experience that silence where you can hear the scratching of the lizard as they skittle across the rocks.
And your question is?
What was there, what was, like when you started to experience that, I'm wondering what that brought out in you in terms of your own creativity. I know, like, the book is obviously a result of that, but I'm wondering if that revelation gave you more than the lasting effects, I guess, the ripple effects of that experience brought
Well,
you more.
what I found was that I became much more attuned to nature. Now in New York, it's hard to find nature, so it's not fair to make a comparison. But when I got to Santa Fe and began to realize that I could differentiate the bird songs and that I could hear the rustle of the wind through the pinon trees, I began to realize, oh, life is more variable and more beautiful than I had previously connected. So I have people say to me that my little dog Lily is the star of the book,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll bring Lily on a little later so you can see her. And I I was tracing Lily's attention span and she has very acute hearing, and she's very enamored of Nick, my assistant. And he comes every day in the afternoon, and he pulls into the driveway at a distance from the house. And I don't hear him, but Lily does. And she goes, Nick, Nick, and she rushes to the door. And I would say that I learned from Lily an eagerness to connect to sound.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see that in my dogs. I have two German shepherds who are adolescents. I would say they're not. They act like puppies, but they're somewhere around 80 pounds each. They're enormous, but it is incredible to watch them respond to sounds in the neighborhood, and the things that they will ignore and the things that they will perk up for and go running to. Primarily, they can hear. There's Lily, I think, in the background.
Yes, I'll put her up here so you can see her.
But they can hear my husband's truck, like 10 blocks away. Oh, she's beautiful.
And she's a little bit
She's so
camouflaged.
sweet.
She's not shy at all if you're actually in her presence. But when
I love it.
on the camera, she says, "Really, Mom? Really?" So
I have lizards to chase.
I have lizards to chase. I'm a busy dog. Don't interrupt. Right, here she goes back to Nick.
It's fantastic.
So
Um,
when we do interviews, Lily keeps tabs on what we're saying. And she jumps up on Nick's lap and says, "Okay, you have an hour. Give me a massage."
Smart dog.
Yes.
Very, very smart dog. Um, can you, so for people who maybe haven't had the chance to read your book yet, again, the people who are listening right now are painters and artists, and I'm really interested, and I think this is a topic that we as artists struggle with a lot, about your observations of listening to yourself and of hearing your own voice and your own intuition. What have you, now that you've sort of been focused on listening? I'm curious what your insights have been about listening to yourself as a creator, and how that maybe has enlightened your work.
Well, I want to say that the listening path starts with three tools that many people are familiar with from the artist's way. They are morning pages, artist states, and walks. And all three of these tools are tools which tune you into yourself. The morning pages are 3 pages of longhand writing about whatever crosses your mind. So you're bearing witness to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
An artist's date, you're out doing something festive. It's a solo festive expedition where you're wooing your artist, and you're filling the well. And the well is what I think of as an interior reservoir of images that we draw upon when we paint, and
Mm-hmm.
when we write. But the saturation of visual images is pretty profound. And so then the third tool is walking, which is so simple, but it's something that people tend to overlook. and I say, take yourself out twice a week for a 20-minute walk and just pay attention to what's around you. And what I have found with these three tools is that they all wake up uh, what you want to call your higher self. Uh,
Mhm.
and your higher self is an intuitive, inspirational, imaginative self uh, that we may be in the accustomed to overlooking. So these tools teach you how not to overlook your cues.
Mm. I've been doing the morning pages have it always seems so hyperbolic to say, oh, they've changed my life, but they really have, especially like over a long period of time of doing them. They have really grounded my practice and made it so much easier to be in tune with myself and to hear those voices, to hear what's actually what the recurring conversations are, that I think in the past I might have just glossed over or missed. But I have to say that I have gotten out of the practice of using the walks as a source for inspiration. I tend to be more either, especially now that I've moved to Argentina, I live in a place where it's not doesn't feel, at least for me, maybe that's my excuse, so simple to go for a walk. And I've noticed that there's more of a distance between the higher power, the nature, than I've ever experienced, because I always lived closer to wilderness, let's say.
Mhm.
It's a really powerful experience, I think. What what did so those three concepts are things that are super powerful in terms of listening to your inner voice, listening to yourself, listening to that creative power inside of us. And I think what I've seen from a lot of artists is that maybe we overlook that too. Maybe we think it's too simple. We tend to overcomplicate things
Mhm.
and feel like there's got to be something more than writing and going on artist dates and going for long walks. And yet, when we do it, we know it's the truth.
Well,
But there's a resistance to doing it, I think.
I recently had someone say to me that they reviewed my book and they said Julia's tools are simple and repetitive. And I think it was intended as an insult. But I read that and I thought, yes,
It
yes,
is.
tools should be simple and repetitive. And I think that particularly for painters, when they are working on a piece, their sense of time washes away from them, and they are essentially timeless creators, and their sense of age washes away from them,
Mm.
and they tend to become ageless creators. So I think I think using the simple tools creates a great awakening. And it sounded to me like that's what you were saying.
Yes. I think that the repetition is so powerful. And the habitual repeating and making it a ritual, and really embracing that it is a ritual. And yes, you do the same thing for years and decades. And that is, that repetition is what makes it so powerful.
Well, I had a friend say to me recently, Julia, I've been doing morning pages for 22 years now,
Oh,
uh,
wow.
and I'm an atheist, so I'm not looking for a spiritual experience. But what I found doing the morning pages is that I wrote 13 feature films and sold them. And
Wow.
I said to him, well, you don't believe in God, but clearly God believes in you.
Clearly, there's something working with you. I want to look and see. So we have a number of people who are listening in on this call. So for those of you who are here listening in, if you want to go ahead, if you have questions for Julia, go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and we can we can kind of start going through those little bit by bit. I just want to make sure you guys are able to ask the questions that you want, that we leave enough time for that. um, so I want to go back to this the concept of repetition and allowing that to come through. Artists also tend to work in artists. I use the blanket term artist, and I'm usually talking about visual artists, but I think it's probably better to sort of specify that we're talking painters that specifically tend to work in series, and we tend to sometimes we'll be working on an idea for an extended period of time, and really exploring this idea of repetition, and really exploring this idea of um, going deep into an idea. And I'm wondering, so my question for you is what you've written over 40 books, I think it is. And
Quite a few.
yeah, quite a few. And you've been exploring this idea of self-realization and morning pages, and this idea that person said was repetitive, repetitive on purpose. What have you learned about taking an idea and exploring it for decades, for that amount of time? I mean, to write 40 books with on creativity and on this process. I'm wondering, as you're writing it, if you ever had like feelings of doubt about what you were doing, about what you were working on, if you ever felt like, oh, is this repetitive? And how you managed that, how you kept going.
Well, I think I'm not alone in having an inner critic, a censor that comments to me on my work. I call my critic Nigel. And Nigel is a gay British interior decorator. And nothing can ever be Nigel's standards. So I will be writing, and Nigel will say, you've said this before, and intended as a criticism.
Uh-huh.
I have learned to say to him, Nigel, thank you for sharing, and keep right on writing. But I think a lot of times people will come to my work with the hope that I can eliminate their inner critic.
Mm.
And what I say to them is, I don't believe we can eliminate it entirely, but we can miniaturize it. So when you write morning pages and your inner Nigel says, oh, this is boring, You say, "Thank you, Nigel, for sharing." You're training your Nigel that he has to step aside and allow you to create. And this becomes a portable skill so that when you move to the canvas and your critic starts talking to you, you can one more time say, "Nigel, thank you for sharing. Uh, but I think I'm going to keep right on painting."
Mm-hmm. I love this idea of giving him a name and a personification and really detailing out who this inner critic is, because it makes it feel so much. I think it makes a big difference to realize that the inner critic is not the truth. That that the thoughts in our head aren't reality in a way, or that they aren't just because we think them, just because we have this inner critic, just because we think like, oh, is this repetitive, or oh, I've done this before, I've said this before, I might be boring people. Just because that thought passes through our head doesn't mean that it's the truth. And so giving him that level of personification, characterizing the inner critic, allows us to set it apart and for it to be something that we can also laugh at in a way. That it's this Nigel, like the name Nigel just made. I have a lot of associations with the name Nigel, so it makes me giggle a little bit. I have some friends I have a good friend who's named as Nigel, and he was really, really funny. So just anything like that that sort of sets it apart from what we believe is truth.
I think until you name your critic and turn him into a cartoon character, uh, you tend to think of it as the truth or the voice of doom. And
Yes.
then when you turn it into a cartoon character, its negativity becomes laughable. And
Mm.
it becomes like, I don't know how many of you have a negative relative uh, that every time you're invited to a family picnic has something horrid to say about it. And you all come to understand uh, that Uncle Nigel uh, is just a party pooper. And I think to the extent that you can say to yourself, "Oh, my critic is a party pooper," and you begin to laugh. Uh, I believe in writing bad poetry, uh,
Mm.
and I write it at my critic. I wrote a detective novel called The Dark Room, and it got 19 wonderful reviews. And then the 20th review was very negative.
Mm.
And unfortunately, it was in the New York Times. So I found myself feeling like I should wear sackcloth and ashes out in the street and just be really embarrassed that I had written a quote bad book. And then I realized, no, it's a good book. And I just need my humor back. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wrote a little poem that goes, "This little poem goes out to Bill Kent," he was the reviewer, "who must feel awful the way that he spent his time dissing Carl Jung instead of on the work I'd done." And I, I use this trick of bad poetry whenever I'm faced with criticism. And I find that humor uh, gives me my power back.
I love that. And it makes you laugh, which is
Yeah.
also such a relief and so good for the spirit. That I love that. Like I can imagine doing, with artists, we have this saying that you have to do like 1,000 bad paintings, at least 1,000 bad paintings in your lifetime. So I kind of like the idea of creating, like dedicating the bad paintings to our inner Nigels,
Yes.
and having or having the 1,000 miles of canvas that we go through to get to the good stuff, that's all dedicated to the critics out there. um, um, Sean here in the audience is asking, is saying that her pages often turn into two voices, almost um, questions and then answers, one having good advice and the other resisting following the advice.
And tell me what your question is, Sean.
And so she's asking, or Sean is asking, could you talk about this? So I guess the question is, have you experienced that, this duality inside of you, that on the one side there's the wisdom that we have this deep inner wisdom, if we can listen enough and pay attention to it. And then on the other side we have this kind of, I see it personally. Sean's not writing this, but I see it personally as this kind of like this scared little child that's afraid of being criticized, afraid of what they will think, afraid of doing it wrong or being judged somehow. And I think that part of us is almost like asking for protection, in the sense that it doesn't want us to do these things. It tries to stop us from creating, from putting ourselves out there. And so I think, like with the two voices things, we have the questions that we ask ourselves, and then the inner wisdom gives us really good advice and knows what to do. And then up comes this like kind of resistance, the protection, it can be Nigel, it can be like the scared part of us that just doesn't want to be seen. And then so I think, do you have that sort of duality have you experienced that sort of duality in your writing, in your morning pages, in your work, and how do you deal with that?
Well, I think that pages train us to expand, and they do it like Chinese water torture, a drop at a time. And we change a drop at a time. So I was writing morning pages, and I asked the question, what shall I do next? And I heard back, you will be writing radiant songs. And I thought, not bloody likely. I'm 45 years old. If I were the least bit musical, I would know it. So I ignored the advice, and I listened to the diminishing voice that was making fun of me and saying that it wasn't likely that I was musical. And a week went by, and I asked again, what shall I do next? And I heard again, you will be writing radiant songs. And I thought, I don't think I can do that. But a third week came up, and it was saying, you will be writing radiant songs. And I said, oh, all right, I'll try. And I was visiting a girlfriend of mine who lived in the Rocky Mountains. And I told her, I keep praying and writing morning pages and asking what to do next. And I keep getting told I will be writing radiant songs. And I don't think it's likely. And she said, why don't you go sit down by the creek? And she pointed her way down the ledge of her property to a Rocky Mountain creek. and I made my way down the hill, and I sat on a boulder by the creek, and I was sort of half-assed meditating, and all of a sudden I heard, "My green heart is filled with apples. Your dark face is filled with stars. I am the one that you've forgotten. You are the one my heart desires. So dance when you think of me, sing to remember me, sing till your heart can see who we are. Dance when you think of me, sing to remember me, sing till your heart can see who we are." And I thought, oh my God, I think it's a song. And I went scrambling back up the hill to my girlfriend and said, "Listen to this." And she said, "Here." And she shoved a little teeny Radio Shack uh, tape recorder in my face. And she said, "Sing it into this." So I,
Wow.
so that was my experience with starting to write songs. And if you go to my website, which is juliacameronlive.com, you'll find I did a musical called Avalon, and the music is on the website. I did 40 flower songs, songs about individual flowers in the garden.
Uh-huh.
And I did a medium at large uh, musical about ghosts. And all of this was in the face of the diminishing voice saying, "You can't do that." And the positive voice saying, "Well, maybe I'll try." And
Mm.
I think that voice that says, "Well, maybe I'll try," becomes stronger the longer you do morning pages.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Maybe I'll try is like you said, it's an expansive statement. It's an expansive idea versus, I think that's when we know that our higher self, that our inner voice is speaking to us, is when it's when the result of the action that it's asking us to take is expansive rather than contraction. And that has for me been super powerful in thinking about and trying to decipher what's coming out on the pages. I think, for someone who's only been writing morning pages for about 7 years, I'm still a baby at it. There's just so much. There's so much to write. There's so much to learn. There's so much to do, and 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 there's so much that comes out of it that surprises me every time I do it. There's a big surprise for me in terms of what my voice is telling me to do, and the biggest lesson I think is using that expansive part, rather than the contraction. And I think I'm very, very cerebral. I'm very, I guess, like on the intellectual side. So the difficult part for me has been learning to listen to my heart instead of my head. And I think that as artists, it has to come from the heart. And we may sounds going to sound funny saying it, and we may know that intellectually, but allowing it to be is an entirely different thing. Can, can you speak a little bit about the idea of working from the heart?
Well, first of all, I want to say that the three tools that you're given at the beginning of the book all are tools that move you out of your intellect into your heart. And they the morning pages are where you dream, and where you say, "Oh, I'd like to try," and they are sort of a place where you are daring. When you take an artist date, you're nurturing your inner youngster or your inner artist, and it responds with shock, and it wakes up and it starts giving you ideas. And the ideas that come to you, just like when they said to me, "You will write radiant songs," that was something that came from the heart. And I I think walking also moves you into your heart. And I don't know if you walk with your dogs. Uh, they're a little bit distracting.
Mm-hmm.
Walk with your dog, and he goes, "Oh, look at that handsome Rottweiler. Oh, look at that darling Cocker Spaniel."
Look at all these things to chase.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of animals in the street here, so we tend to go walking in extremely early in the morning. So when it's a little bit, the world's a little bit quieter. Susan is asking, what was your best artistic date?
Aha. My favorite artist date of all times is one that happens in Evanston, Illinois, outside Chicago, where there is a pet store. And the pet store has a, um, a bunny, a live bunny. And he's the same size as my dog.
Oh,
Uh,
wow, that's a big bunny.
he's a huge bunny, and his name is George. And when you go to the pet store, you're allowed to pet George. And George is friendly and curious. And if you want to pet George, George wants to be petted. And that's my very favorite all time artist date, because it wakes up a sense of wonder. Uh, oh, isn't this creature delicious?
Isn't he? Yeah. What is it? What do you think? I mean, you've mentioned that twice about, I think, about animals, about Lily and about George, and how they wake up another part of you. I'm wondering, I'm kind of wondering what that, I mean, it is a part of nature, but I'm wondering what it is about animals that sort of wake us up in that way.
Well, I think it's their innocence.
Mm,
Uh, and I know you have two puppies, and 80-pound puppies, uh, and that when they play, they're carefree. Uh,
yes.
and I think animals are carefree, and they move us uh, to a sense of wonder, and to a sense of fun. And I think I want to say clearly that uh, when we work on our creativity, we do morning pages. But then when we take an artist's date, we're opening ourselves up to the play of ideas. And we have that expression, the play of ideas, but we don't realize that it's a prescription. Play and you will get ideas.
Mm, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm realizing now as I've talked to you, while I'm talking to you, that that I'm very impatient. I'm very impatient for my creativity, and that I'm very, I think I've really latched on to the morning pages, and then just kind of like put the other two aside as I know I should do that. And I want to do that, but I keep pushing it off, kind of like a
What,
exercise.
what I find when I teach is that if I say, I have a tool for you, it's a nightmare.
That's
You have to wake up 45 minutes early. You have to go to the page and you have to do it daily. Well, people
mm,
will say, oh, I get it, work. And they set to work. But then if I say, now once a week, I want you to take yourself out somewhere and play. Uh,
yeah.
this is where the resistance comes in. And people typically uh, will do morning pages, but will put off doing an artist state because it seems so frivolous. And I think one of the things that uh, we need to address as artists is that when we're too serious, our art suffers. And when we're more playful, our art flourishes. But this is not something that we usually tell ourselves. So I feel like sort of my job is saying, okay, now play.
It's so true. I think we take it's so interesting because um part of the disconnect, I think, is the idea of scheduling time for play. It just doesn't almost doesn't feel like play anymore, maybe. And I don't know what it is. It's really interesting. I'm going to have to really think about that more, and what exactly that is. But
But can you hear yourself saying, I have to think about it more? I have to get more serious instead of saying, I'll just do it.
right, right, good catch. Yeah, yeah. Like the visual painters especially, I think we have a tendency to take ourselves so seriously. You have to be very like you have to get this amount of work done, and it has to have all these expectations that we put on it because we want our work to be validated in some way, whether that's selling it on our own or getting into a gallery. But there's all this pressure that we put on ourselves, and we lose that play. We lose the 5-year-old Antrice who used to lay on the ground on the floor with her crayons and draw for hours and hours and hours, and would be like, and showing the mailman my artwork because he popped up on the doorstep and somebody had to see it. Just this unabashed, look, everybody, look what I did. And I think, and it's interesting that how we lose that, and how this resistance to play, I think, ties into it and creates a scenario where it's that retraction again, as opposed to expansion. It's like, let me get it perfect and then I'll show everybody, or let me get it exactly right and then I can play.
Well, I think when you're talking about perfectionism, you're talking about a besetting evil that many artists feel. And uh, I have an exercise that I do when I teach, which is if number from 1 to 10. If I didn't have to do it perfectly, I'd try. If I didn't have to do it perfectly, I'd try. And when you fill out that list of 10 things, if you didn't have to do it perfectly, you discover that perfectionism has blocked you on many fronts. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
there's a wonderful line from Picasso saying that artists are born as children, and the trick is remaining a child as you're an adult.
Yes. Yes. It's so um, simple and not easy. Or we make it really hard on ourselves. We make it really hard by taking it so seriously and not allowing ourselves to play. There it is. Yeah.
Well, I think we have confusion. Uh, we we are confused about artists and intellectuals, and I think uh, that a lot of times we get in trouble as artists if we try to be intellectual, and yet we tell ourselves that it's important to be intellectual. We want to be regarded by our peers as smart, and one of the things that I have had to face down uh, over the years uh, is my own tendency. Uh, when I, bef- well, I'll tell a story. In 1978, in January, I got sober. And for the 10 years prior to that, I had a writing career, but it was devoted entirely to my brilliance. I wanted to be clever. I wanted to be thought well of. And then I got sober, and it was suggested to me uh, that I should try letting a higher creative force right through me. And I said, what if it doesn't want to? And uh, I was told, well, just try it. So I started trying to let this higher force right through me. And my prose straightened out, my career straightened out, and I was trying to write to be of service, and my career took off. And I think a lot of times uh, people need permission uh, to let the force right through them, or to paint through them, and to not be demanding that we be perfect, and not be demanding that our work be a finished product, to be willing to be a work in progress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me how much we tend to use external things to block ourselves, to sort of dull the sense almost of being alive. And what I mean by that is whether it's sobriety, whether it's drinking or being busy or or eating, or like all the things that we do to sort of like not feel what it means to be human, or not do the things that we're afraid of doing. We sort of, or, social media, or like all these things that we do instead of what we want to do. is so often because we are so afraid of doing what we're called to do, that we will do anything except that will, either use alcohol, use drugs, use busyness, use like this, constantly going to the phone and looking for answers there instead of seeking the answers inside and letting what's inside of us come out and be heard and be seen. And that seems to be the work that we're here to do in a way, but we just fight it so hard oftentimes.
Well, I think we have to realize that we live in an anti-art culture. We live in a culture uh, that gets its meaning from cash on the dollar on the barrelhead. So we have a tendency to think, if I'm not making my living off my art, it can't be real art. I'm not a real artist. And we ignore the fact that what makes you an artist is the act of making art. And we tend to want validation from a gallery owner, uh, from a critic, uh, from an outside source, rather than validating ourselves by saying, see, look what I did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's that self-validation is the most powerful. It's that really is the self-validation. I think if you can trust yourself and believe in what you do without you you don't need another person, you don't need an external force to tell you that what you're creating is valid. And I think, it's kind of like what you experienced, what you said is that if you really trust what you're doing and you really trust and believe in the work that you're creating, then you're going to stay the course and you can't help but make something that's amazing.
Well, I think that we have an anti art culture that tells us we, we need to sell our work, that tells us that work for the sake of work isn't worthy. And I think what we need to say is doing the work itself is the work. And I, I think, I think that, well, I'll tell you a little story. 33 years ago, I made a feature film. I wrote it, produced it, directed it, and we shot it, and it was perfect. And then my sound was stolen, and the police didn't think much about it. Lady, we have bigger fish to fry. We have murders. And so I had a choice of either to reshoot the film or to loop it. And I chose to read lips, cut the film silent, and then loop the film in its entirety. And when it was finished looping, I submitted it to the London Film Festival, and they accepted it, and they reviewed it, and they said, "This woman is not no coward, but she is funny." So it couldn't be widely released in America because we're not used to looped films. And so for 33 years, I I put the film away. And then one day, about a month ago, I woke up and said, that was a good film after all. 33 years had passed.
Wow.
And so I got a copy of the film, and I talked to the person who does my website, and I said, can we make a place for the film on the website so that people can see it now, and judge for themselves if they think it's funny. Uh, and so now when you go to juliacameronlive.com, you'll see a heading that says Julia's Art.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and then there's a section for plays. I've written many plays, a section for music, a section for poetry. And then there's the film, which is called God's Will. And I think
I
every
have to see this film now.
I, I I liked it.
That is a great story. I love that. I love that so much, that especially that 30, it took you 33 years to come to that realization that you loved the film, that you really liked the film, and that you were going to make sure it was seen, and that you made it happen. That's
Yes.
fantastic. I love that. Lauren is asking, this is a really interesting question. This is a really good one. When it comes to synchronicities, do you always ascribe meaning to them? She says, I find them often and I'm not totally sure how to handle them.
So is your question what I'm not sure what
What
the question is. It sounds like you have synchronicity and you're having trouble taking it seriously. Is that accurate?
I think that's what she's saying. Yeah, because yeah, she's asking if you always ascribe meaning to them. It seems like she sees them, she experiences them, and then doesn't know what to do with them.
Well, this is where I think morning pages, walks, and artist states come into play, where you find yourself saying, oh, this does resonate, or oh, I don't think so. I'm in the middle of an I don't think so right now. After putting up God's Will after 33 years, I thought, I'm going to make another movie. And for 33 years, I had been telling myself, you're too old. I'm 73. And all of a sudden, I found myself saying, well, what else are you going to do between ages 73 and 75? You might as well make a film.
Uh-huh. So did you start telling yourself you were too old to stay to make another film 33 years ago? So you started saying that when you were 40?
Um, I think I was so disappointed about not being able to release the film widely that I probably spent 10 years in sheer grief, and that made me 50.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere in there, I started saying, you're too old. And It's interesting. I don't think I'm too old to write another book.
But you think you're too old to create another film.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to do it anyway.
Good. Good. I don't really see a difference. Well, I know there's obviously a difference between writing a book and creating a film, but what I mean by that is it's a creative act, that you're called to do. And I think it's so interesting how we so often will sort of delineate things and say like, oh, this is different than this, and find reasons not to do it. as opposed to kind of what you do when you say, like, I'm going to try anyway, I will try.
Right.
I think that when you think to yourself, I'm going to try to do this anyway, you put yourself into that sort of problem solving, looking for ways, looking for reasons, looking for all the evidence that says you can do it, as opposed to thinking, oh, I can't do it. Then you start looking for all the reasons why you can't.
So if you go under the Julia's art and you come to plays, you will see that there is a play called Love in the DMZ. And we put this up on Zoom and did a production, and Nick, my assistant, stars as the male lead. And he's brilliant. And um, I think shooting the Zoom production of Love in the DMZ made me itchy to do film again.
Nice. I'll be looking forward to that,
So
to the next film.
so you can.
Do you, sorry, we overlapped. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so you can go see Love in the DMZ and God's Will.
Now I've got 2 films to watch tonight.
Right.
Exciting. Very exciting. Kitty is asking, I know Kitty, so, and I'm laughing because I think I was doing this earlier as we were talking. Kitty says, I don't understand how to figure out an artist date. Can you say more about them? And I'm gonna hazard a guess to say that the artist date is gonna come from the heart, not from trying to figure it out. That part of it is listening to your heart, listening to this part of you, to go do something playful and just allowing it to happen.
And I think we get too serious. We try to find the perfect artist date. And that's what I think Kitty is doing. She's saying it, well, it can't be so simple as go to the zoo,
Uh-huh.
go to a children's bookstore, take a bubble bath, listen to a strange podcast, sketch. So any of those things are good artist dates. And when we're in the middle of the pandemic and we can't go out freely, we need to turn our imagination to what can we do in our immediate environment. And that may be take a bubble bath.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Paint your toenails scarlet.
Anything to kind of like shake things up a little bit or see from a different perspective, right?
Exactly.
I love that. I also like this idea, that you said, I keep thinking of what you said about the voice that told you to write a radiant song, that you would write a radiant song. And you responding back that you would try. I like to think when I have that voice inside of me that says, like, oh, you can't do that, or now in the pandemic where we are prevented from doing a lot of things, to start to write about, just to finish the sentence, I can if.
I can
Mm-hmm.
if I don't have to do it perfectly.
There it is. Yes. Yeah. If I don't have to do it perfectly, I would.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that is so I think I won't if I didn't have to do it perfectly, I would is super helpful for internal things, for getting past the blocks that we bring up internally, getting past Nigel, getting past all the voices inside of ourselves. And if I found to be really useful in the pandemic, when it's like I can't do that because of the pandemic, or I can't travel right now because of the pandemic. And then I start to think like I can if I, and then fill in the blank. And it is that a variation on your question of bringing it's not solving the problems, but it's looking for the opportunities that are right in front of us.
Well, I think this is where we come back to the idea of play. And if we say to ourselves, what would be fun? What would be fun? And then we do that. And
Yes.
I think we should be gentle with ourselves, that we've been raised to have a lot of negative voices. Uh, if you say to your parents, I think I want to be a painter, their likely response is, oh, sweetheart, don't you think you might need something to fall back on?
Mm-hmm.
And that isn't what they would say if you said, I think I'm going to be a banker.
You should be an artist so you have something to fall back on. Yeah, it's true. We're never ever told that. Or the artistic endeavors are the I can't think of any other occupation or any other thing that we do where the response is you should have something to fall back on. Except maybe I had a friend who wanted to be a horse trainer. When she was in second grade, she told her second grade teacher that she wanted to train horses as a living, and the second grade teacher said, "No, you have to think of an occupation." And my friend now trains horses, so that came out. One last question for you. This is from Julie. Sorry, from Diane. She says, Diane says, I love you, Julia. Your workbook changed my life back in 1992. My issue now at my ripe old age is trying to find a goal to reach because all of my goals were met when I did your exercises then. I'm doing the morning pages and on week 10 and resisting.
And so her question is there still a dream?
I think so. I think the question is kind of like, where do I go? Where do I go from here? When maybe you've kind of had this beautiful life where you've exhausted most of your goals. Where do you find new ones? How do you push yourself further creatively?
Well, this is where we come back to those three basic tools. And I know I sound like a fanatic, uh, but
You're
I'm,
so repetitive, Julia.
yes, I'm repetitive and fanatical.
I
And
love it.
I, I want to say ideas will come to you. You're in week 10. Uh, you're on the brink of ideas. Keep writing, keep walking, keep doing playful things, and tell yourself age doesn't matter, because you probably have dreams like I do, where you say, oh, age is a barrier. but age doesn't have to be a barrier. It can be a an advantage.
Absolutely. I know I said that was going to be the last question, but can I ask you one more? Will you indulge me one more?
Okay.
And then I'll let you go. Okay. Because something that you just said just kind of reminded me. I get this question a lot from artists who listen to the podcast. And so many people sort of resist the call to be an artist, and they go on, they do other things. Maybe they have a different career or raise a family, and then later on they come back to it. And when they come back to it, they often say, I'm too old to be an artist. They're scared because they feel like they have to make up for lost time, that they're in a hurry. They like there's this sort of like anxiety about not doing enough and running out of time, and et cetera, et cetera. What would you say to those types of artists who feel like they're starting too late, or that they're too old?
Well, I wrote a whole book that's called It's Never Too Late to Begin Again.
So they should read that book.
And it it talks about the very process of committing yourself to art at a certain age. And I think that, uh, again, when you are actually creating, you are timeless, you are ageless. You know, you find yourself feeling youthful, even if your calendar age is high. And so I want to say, allow yourself to begin.
Julia, thank you so much. It was an enormous honor to have this time with you and to be able to talk with you. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk with us.
Well, you're very welcome. I, I have to tell you that I loved the title of the podcast, The Savvy Painter. I have a sister uh, who is a painter by profession, and uh, she supported herself and her horse farm off of her portrait work.
Wow.
And she was one of the first, quote, victims of me practicing the artist's way. Uh, I, I said to her, try writing 3 pages. I think they'll work for you, even though you are a painter.
I love it. And did it?
And it did. It did.
Sisters are wonderful for that, for being the early guinea pigs and for taking it in stride and allowing us to practice our gifts on them.
Yes.
Yes. Julie, thank you so much. Blessings to you. And Nick, thank you for helping us set this up. I very much appreciate your work on this too. Fantastic. Okay, Julia, thank you so much. And I hope we stay in touch. And this has been, again, just the biggest honor and pleasure to talk to you. We're getting lots of thank yous in the chat I'm seeing. So yeah, this is fantastic. Wonderful. So much love coming through for you. I don't know if you can see it all, but there's a lot of love coming through for you right now, Julie. So I hope you feel that.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.